Temple is the year after the 9/11 tragedy, as some of you remember. On that day in 2002, we read the names of every victim of 9/11, every single person who was murdered. He was very moved by that, and he said, I don't know many synagogues that did that in the whole country. And we did it, and we had a service every year for the first 5 years. And I told him eventually people stopped coming. I mean, Mike, you were there. I mean, I know people were there. There were people who came to the services when we first started them. And the problem was eventually people didn't come, and it petered out because people forgot, people became complacent. And I really do feel that if we don't remember, and we don't, again, this is one of the things that we stress in Judaism, if we don't honor those who passed and remember those who were murdered, like we do it with Yom HaShoah, and again, as we do when we observe Yizkor and Yahrzeit for the people that we love, we forget who we are, we forget our history, we forget our values, we forget what it is that we're actually living for. So it's very interesting. It's not, remembering people is not about being in sadness. It's not about living in grief. It's not about wallowing in what we lost. What it is remembering everything that was special about that person. And so when we think about remembering a person who has passed, one person, it becomes overwhelming sometimes. And tonight, on this night tonight, I'm dedicating the teachings tonight and the learning that we're doing to my father, who passed away 1 year ago tonight on the secular calendar. He passed away. His Yahrzeit was about 10 days ago on the Hebrew calendar, which is why I created that tribute for him. But on the secular calendar, it's tonight. So today on the 25th, I woke up, I thought about where I was on the 25th of August last year. And so it's about this day too, on the secular calendar. And so when I think about what my father meant to me, and I think about all the fathers and mothers and all the people who passed away, the sons and daughters who passed away on 9/11, it's overwhelming. It's something, it's hard for me to even begin to comprehend, just because of one life. And so
Rabbi, someone once said, and it might have been you, I'm not sure, but as long as you remember, they live.
Yeah, I do.
We honor them. We honor them.
Yeah, they say that there's
love, not in sadness. There's
two times that you die. That you die when you die, and then you die when the last person who remembers you passes.
Right.
And that's the time that you really, some people say you really die, is when the last person who can remember you passes. So, look, I just hope that on 9/11, my point is only that I've been thinking about it, maybe compounded by my own loss, by all the loss that we've had over the last year, and the feeling of sadness. And again, now thinking about the fact that those people who sacrificed their lives in Afghanistan in the last 20 years, and thankfully the death toll has gone down over the last couple of years. We talked about that too. But the reality is there were a lot of Americans who risked their lives, gave their lives. Many young people whose lives were cut short in Afghanistan, in the deserts and cities and on the roads of Afghanistan, who we can't let them die for nothing. We can't let them die in vain, and we can't ever forget their sacrifice. So again, in the midst of everything else that we are remembering at this time of year, I really don't want to let this go unnoticed. And again, I looked at what I wrote for the Signal last year, and I was like, wow, I wrote 19 years ago on this date, around this time. And I'm like, oh, I can't say the same thing on 20 years ago on this date. So I'm going to probably write about something different, but I will hopefully write about something on 9/11 and try to remind our community, at least in our community, that we have an obligation. So we'll see. I mean, let's hope I'm wrong, but it's 3 weeks away, and I haven't heard a whole lot that's going on for this. And it's hard to believe also too, just on a basic level, that it's 20 years gone. So I do want to recognize, and again, we have a bunch of people that are with us on Facebook, and again, hopefully you'll also find ways to whenever anybody watches this, hopefully before 9/11, to set some time aside, each one of us, anything I can do to encourage that. And again, we'll try to come up with some of the things that and post some of the things virtually so people could do that. So tonight, again, we're remember and honor my father, and we're going to study some Torah tonight. We're going to read Tavo. We have one chapter that we're going to start back with from Tze, from this portion that we read last week that had so much down the in the way of laws and a crazy amount of laws that again sometimes seemed overwhelming, that we had so many laws. But I'm going to go back to chapter 25, which is where we left off, and I'm going to put this up here for you to see. So this is the very end of Tze, the very last. And again, I was talking to Harvey. We were going to talk a little bit about it at the Havdalah. We had a wonderful turnout. Harvey said, you got to talk a little bit about the Torah portion. And in the end, it got dark. And by the time everybody got there, it was kind of not the right time. But it really was an amazing class last week to reflect on the fact that these laws were in some ways so well ahead of their time. And the reality is that as we're reading this, we're thinking about these laws of a culture in Afghanistan that's been caught between the West and the East, and between laws that have developed in the last 2,000 years or 3,000 years since the Torah, and to some extent laws that are behind the Torah as far as where they are. And you'll see, by the way, that there's some things here even in this week's portion. So last week we read a little bit about capturing women in war, which is something that we've seen already. Taliban and ISIS, some other groups that have broken our hearts. Not just, by the way, from a modern level, but from the Torah level. From 3,000 years ago, we're already our Torah law protected women more than they were treating women today. But today we're going to step back into some laws, and where we begin in chapter 25 is when there's a dispute between men and they go to a law and a decision is rendered declaring the one in the right and the other in the wrong. If the guilty one is to be flogged, the magistrate shall have him lie down and be given lashings in his presence by count as his guilt warrants. He may be given up to 40 lashes, but not more, lest being flogged further to excess, your brother be degraded before your eyes. So this is a law of punishing someone with lashes, with what we call makot, which in Hebrew is the word for lashes or flogging. And it was an acceptable form of punishment in Jewish law, mainly because, again, there were no prisons. And so people couldn't be punished long-term through that. There were financial punishments that could be rendered. But as far as punishing someone in a way beyond just financially hurting them, as far as physically hurting them, they're somewhere between, doing nothing and killing them. There was flogging, but there was a limit, and the limit to it was 40. So normally, in most cases, then 39 was actually up to 39 was actually considered to be like the worst amount of lashes you could get, which would be for something that was very, very bad. So there isn't cutting off people's arms or hands. There isn't some of those traditions or acceptable forms of punishment, non-lethal capital punishment, if you will. But these are ways. And again, it's not just because you could hurt the person, but because, again, the person would be degraded before your eyes. And that is the law here, that even within punishment, you don't, there is a person's dignity that is at stake. Another law that we've read about, or again, we talked about last week, which is laws that kind of protect animals. We talked about the fact that an ox and a donkey are not supposed to be, they're not supposed to be yoked together, so that one is, the ox is much bigger and much stronger. The donkey really couldn't keep up with it. Similarly, it says you shall not muzzle an ox while it's threshing. So while the ox is working for you, you have to allow it to eat. You can't deny it food, so you can't muzzle it. So that's an interesting, again, protection of animals. Again, we're jumping around. We have laws about capital punishment. We have, or civil law. We have laws of animals, ethical laws, and then we get into family laws oftentimes as well. And here's one that is definitely long time gone. Even by the time of the Talmud, this law was really not, well, you'll see. When brothers dwell together and one of them dies and leaves no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall unite with her. He shall take her as his wife and perform the lever's duty, the yabum in Hebrew. The first son that she bears shall be accounted to the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out in Israel. But if the man does not want to marry his brother's widow shall appear before the elders and in the gate and declare, and so in public, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name in Israel for his brother. He will not perform the duty of the levir. The elders of the town shall then summon him and talk to him. If he insists, saying, do not want to marry him, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull the sandal off his foot, spit on his face, and make this declaration. Thus shall be done to the man who will not build up his father's house. And we call this law the law of chalitza, or the release of chalitza, which is this declaration, this public declaration. And it starts here. It concludes here. And he shall go in Israel by the name of the family of the unsandaled one. So the word chalutz, hana'al, is someone who is without a sandal. So the chalitza is actually the unsandaled, the unsandling. So that's the law. That's the law. It's a long law from standpoint of how many verses it goes.
Yes.
It's you can see 5 verses, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's actually 6 verses. It's a very long law, and it's one that has it's a law, and then there's exceptions to the law, or not exceptions, but how to enforce the law, and what happens if someone doesn't follow the law. Now, look, the most important thing that you can see from the law itself is that the man who marries his sister-in-law does not do so because he wants to, or because it's for fun, and it's because he gets to have another wife, or because, he likes to have a lot of women. That's not the purpose of it. As a matter of fact, it's actually a difficult thing for him to do. And in many cases, it seems like he doesn't want to do it, or he wouldn't do it. He doesn't want the responsibility, because not only is there this responsibility of taking care of the woman, but there's also an issue of the fact that that child that's born is technically not his. It's his brother's, his dead brother's child. So it's not considered his son. It's considered his nephew, but not his son. And of course, he may be very close to the child, but it's not his child. And in a sense, he's essentially supporting this child, and it's not his child. So it's a very difficult situation. It's one that is based on a tribal society where the only way a woman essentially has protection is if she's married or she has a son. And so it really is an issue of and it's not like she didn't have a kid. It's that she has no son. So it's really an issue of her being protected. It has nothing to do with sex. It has nothing to do with love. It has nothing to do with the things that we get married for today. It really is about economic protection, and it's about making sure that a man doesn't disappear from the community. And the only way for him to be just not to leave and to essentially be remembered is to have a child who carries his name. Now you could say, well, that's kind of crazy because it's not his child or whatever. Look, they understood that from a genetic standpoint, the closest you can get to the man is his brother. So shares all of the DNA that he had with his brother. So you're not going to get exactly the same kind of kid, but it's going to look pretty close. Usually, it's pretty much the same DNA. So they understood that. And the purpose of it really was to create a child almost through surrogacy, what I would call surrogacy. And I don't call it that. Other people call it surrogacy too. It really is a surrogate child. And that's the purpose of this Levirate law. Look, we know that by the time of the rabbis, by the time of Talmud, that like everyone did the Levirate marriage. They all got out of it. They all did chalitza. I mean, they all, looked at it as an archaic form, even 2,000 years ago. So while 3,000 years ago, it might've been accepted and even encouraged and essentially legislated, by 2,000 years ago, they didn't want to do it. And they encouraged people to do a chalitza. We know that by the time of the book of Ruth, even when Ruth is supposed to marry somebody else who we never know his name, he's called Plonioni in the Bible, which is essentially like the unknown guy, John Doe is what Plonioni means. We don't know his name. She ends up marrying Boaz, who's the next closest redeeming relative. And that's how she ends up having their child, who ends up being the grandfather of, it's Obed, who's King David's grandfather. So this is how King David essentially is born, is through the chalitza, through the extension of how to kind of like do not force the relative to be and again, Boaz is still a relative, but he's not the closest relative to Ruth or to Naomi, and so Ruth is married to Boaz instead. So it's a really interesting story. It's one of kind of like why we don't follow, or what happens when we don't follow this law. You end up getting a King David, which is pretty great guy for the most part. Not always, not to everybody, but he is considered the first, great Jewish king, and is the Messiah and everything else. And Christians connect Jesus to him and everything else about him. He's the child of the Levirate marriage exception, if you will, the chalitza. And the book of Ruth tells us that story. So this is the story in Deuteronomy. It is another example of family law. And the next one is also a very interesting kind of piece of family law, if you will. If two men fight with each other and the wife of one comes up to save her husband from his antagonist and puts out her hand and seizes him by his genitals, you shall cut off her hand, show no pity. So there is a cutting off hand, not a very common situation, and one which I don't know how many times this actually happened, but in the rare case that a woman decides to intervene on behalf of her husband by grabbing somebody else's genitals, and by the way, according to this, well, it just says she seized his genitals. I will tell you that the rabbis interpreted this law this way, that first of all, it wouldn't have happened very often. And she doesn't just grab his genitals, she crushes his genitals. She essentially renders them impotent. So what we have here is literally a situation, especially in the context of Kitetse, in the context of what we just read. If you have a situation where a man could potentially never be able to have a child again, then she's done something not just to him to hurt him, but to hurt his legacy and his line and his ability to have his name preserved. So that's why the law is kind of so strict on this. So again, it's not just that she touched him, but that she actually renders him, impotent after that. So pretty weird law, definitely in the context of family law that we have in Kitetse. So let's continue. And in here, we've got a law that goes back to Leviticus. You shall not have in your pouch alternate weights, larger and smaller. You shall not have in your house alternate measures, a larger and smaller. You must have completely honest weights and completely honest measures, if you are to endure long in the soil that the Lord your God is giving you. So again, this is the laws of honest weights and measures. And it's interesting. You're thinking, well, why is there weights and there's measures? So they're definitely talking about different ways to measure and weigh product, whether it's a seed or grain that you're measuring out for somebody, or again, weight of wine or oil. All of these different things that you might weigh out, that you would make sure that you didn't have set of weights that were accurate and a set of weights that were not accurate. So this is what they're talking about. So again, it's considered to be one of the things you have to do in order to endure long in the land. For everyone who does these things, everyone who deals dishonestly is abhorrent to the Lord your God. Now we come to this line here, 25:17. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt, how undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. There's actually, as you can see, this commandment of Amalek, which ends the last lines of Ki Teitzei. The last lines of this portion are these three lines, 17, 18, and 19. This is essentially, this is the maftir. So when you consider the fact that as we read this, and as I shared with you my feelings about 9/11, what's interesting about this is that we remember what Amalek did to us. We're supposed to, of course, go to war against them and make sure that, we blot them out, blot out their memory, which is interesting because the only people who remember Amalek is us. There is no attestation of Amalek, the Amalekites, anywhere else in the ancient world. We've never found the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Edomites, the Moabites. Nobody talks about Amalek. As far as if it wasn't for the Jews, no one would remember Amalek. It's amazing to think about that, because it's not like some of the other enemies of the Jewish people, whether it was the Romans, whether it was the Nazis, whether it was the Soviets. I mean, these were empires and these were people that everyone will remember in the history books. Nobody remembers Amalek except for us. And what we're supposed to do is blot out their memory, right? Blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. So what's weird is that we're supposed to essentially blot their name out, but at the same time, we're the only ones who remember them. So it's very interesting that kind of the irony of Amalek is that we remember them, though no one else does. Now, there's actually two commandments here. So when we look at the mitzvot and we look at an order of accounting of the mitzvot, there's actually a positive commandment and a negative commandment from the standpoint of a thou shalt and also a thou shalt not. Because remember, we organize our commandments also by you should do something or you shouldn't do something. Now, remember, in the Torah, there's a lot more thou shalt nots than thou shalls, right? So according to tradition, there's about 365 thou shalt nots and about 248, 250 roughly thou shalls. Now, some people say, well, that's kind of negative, right? That we have all these you shall nots. The reason is that, look, you don't have to be legislated to do most of the things in your life. Nobody has to tell you have to do it because the Torah tells you to do it. You do it because you need to do it. You need to do it for your health. You need to do it for your sanity. You need to do it for their presence of mind, all these different reasons you might do something. The Torah talks about things you're not supposed to do. So it's much more important, again, when you talk about why there's a law against it, because you're not supposed to do it. You're supposed to prohibit yourself from doing those things, but you don't have to legislate what every behavior that somebody does. The Torah doesn't look at things like Judaism doesn't look at things like that. You don't have to be legislated to do everything that you do. You have to be legislated in some cases for what you shouldn't do. Well, here there's one for each. It says, you shall not forget. Do not forget. Lo tishkach. Don't forget. But it also says, remember. That's what it starts with. Zachor et asher asa lacha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. So there's both a positive and a negative form of this commandment. That's how important it is that we have two commandments. And again, it gets to what we say when we remember something, especially something like the Amalekites who attacked us and who killed our stragglers, who took us and attacked us when we were in the wilderness and attacked from behind and attacked not the front part where the soldiers were, but where the women and children were, and attacked those people. And so these were horrible people. They did a horrible thing. And we remember how they attacked innocent people, not combatants, innocent people. So as I said, it definitely resonates as we think about 9/11. Some people say, remember 9/11, remember, the World Trade Center, whatever it is that people say, remember the Pentagon. And then other people say, never forget. Do not forget. Now, the reality is maybe we need both. Maybe we need both a commandment to actively engage in the process of memory and to thinking about it. And at the same time, also saying seriously, don't forget. Now, some people say that the do not forget is the minimum that we do, right? That's the stepping back and saying, oh, well, let me just let me not forget it. Okay. Whereas to remember something is an active, takes a proactive and you actually have to induce or engage in something in order to do it. One of them is simply like a barrier of saying, let's not forget. So put it on the calendar, or whatever it is, and that just, I'm not going to forget it. Tie a little string around my finger. Remembering might actually take us into a situation of actively doing something specifically to do that. So that's another possibility. The interesting thing again is it's formed in both ways, both positively as a thou shalt, and all, which is zachor, and then lo tishkach. So again, in the 10 Commandments, most of the 10 Commandments, 7 of the 10 Commandments are thou shalt not. There are only a few that are you shall, like honor your father and mother, zachor et yom HaShabbat, remember the Shabbat. So most of the commandments are not are put in, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't, most of them, but here you have one for each. That's how important it is. And that's the way Kitetse ends. So it begins with war, about going into battle, and it actually ends with, and I just want to remind people, it ends with war. It ends with a war that was committed against us. So in the midst of, again, thinking about how we're supposed to comport ourselves, how we're supposed to behave in battle, we're also supposed to think about how other people who had a whole different set of values engaged in battle too. And it's definitely something, folks, that we think about today. And we're thinking about it right now in the midst of 9/11, which is how do Americans fight, and how do other people fight too? And it's something to think about. It's something definitely we're going to think about over these next few weeks, just by virtue of what we're doing, folks. All right, so we begin Ki Tavo, which also begins with a ki, which is in this case not ki tetzeh, when you go out to battle, but here ki tavo, when you enter al haaretz, when you come into the land that the Lord your God has given you. And it says, it's your heritage, it's your right. You're going to possess it. You're going to settle it. You shall take from every first fruit of the soil, which is in your harvest from the land that the Lord your God has given you. You put it in a basket and you go to the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish his name. You shall go to the priest in charge at that time and say to him, I acknowledge this day before the Lord your God that I have entered the land that the Lord swore to our fathers to assign us. Now, this is the tradition of what we do when we come to our land. And the fact that we're going to offer up an offering of the first fruits. So again, this is one of the harvest holidays. The section that we're about to read right now is the section that we read every year on one of our most, well, I would say on the harvest holiday we follow the most, or that we observe the most, which is Passover. Now, technically speaking, we do this on all of our harvest holidays, if you will, because it's about bringing your first fruits at that time. And here's what we have. You take your first fruits, you put it in a basket, you bring it to the priest in the place that God will tell you, which we know is going to be Jerusalem. We know that it will be Jerusalem. And here's what it says. The priest shall take the basket from your hand and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. And then the priest takes it, and then you recite something. So first you actually do say something when you bring it. You say, I acknowledge this day that I've come into the land, right? Kivati, which is from the root of kitavo, I've come into the land. But watch what you actually say, because what you say is not about the land. It's not about, I'm a farmer, I've harvested this, I'm thankful for my harvest. That would be what, like you normally would say at a Thanksgiving. This is the Jewish Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving. And by the way, our Thanksgiving in our country is based a little bit on this. But what did we do? You shall recite as follows before the Lord your God. My father was a fugitive Aramean, Arami Oved Avi. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us, and they oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery and our oppression. And the Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, by an awesome power, and by signs and by portents. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O Lord, have given me. You shall leave it before the Lord your God and bow low before the Lord your God. So what do you say when you come and you offer up your first fruits? You don't simply say, thank you, God, for my food and for having a great crop. You say, I remember where I came from. Aramio Veravi. I remember that my ancestor went down to Egypt. You remember the Exodus. So what's interesting is that hundreds of years later, much, much later after the Exodus, we're still recounting that and recounting it at our harvest holiday. We're literally saying on our harvest holiday, God, we remember where we came from. It's not about, again, simply saying, thank you, God, for this beautiful sun and the water and the rain and everything else that normal people did for sacrifices. Every other culture that we know of thanked their gods for fertility. They thank God for the sun. They thank God for the rain. They thank God for the seeds. They thank God for the wind. They thanked all those gods because they acknowledged that there was one God for each of those things, and we better thank all of them. No, not only did we recognize God who created everything, we literally said it's not even about it's not even about natural order. It's about our history, and it's the fact that God brought us to this land because of our rescue from Egypt, and the fact that God promised and had brought us to this land, which was our inheritance. And so what's so amazing about this, folks, is that our thanks, our offering of thanks is based on our history, not on nature, not on sacrifices of fertility, but on sacrifices of history. And this is why the Jewish people continue to offer up this saying every year at Passover. And the longest part of our Passover Seder, or at least the part that's supposed to be the longest, is the Magid, is telling the story and reading the Midrash based on this section, the Aramio Veravi. And there's several pages where the rabbis take each one of these sets of words, 2 or 3 words, in some cases 1 word, and creating a Midrash on these words. And so this is the big part of the Haggadah, that where we take these words from Tavo and we explain them, we teach off of them. And so it's a really wonderful text. It's the major text, if you will, of the Haggadah, this text that we just read. So Deuteronomy chapter 25, chapter 26, from right here, from verse from verse 5 or 4, from there, all the way down to verse, right down to here, verse 10. That is the great midrash of Passover, the Haggadah. Now, but that's not the end. So that's the end of what you say, but that's not the end of what you do, because it says, you shall enjoy together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household. So again, setting aside for those who need it. The Levites, as we talked about, because they do not have their own land. They are not farmers. And of course, whenever we read the Levites, we also read, when you've set aside the full 10th part of your yield in the 3rd year, the year of the tithe, you've given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. They may eat their fill in your settlements. So again, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. So again, this is especially in the year of the tithe, but this is every time you come forward. You shall declare before the Lord your God, and again, this is during the tithing time, I have cleared out the consecrated portion from the house, And I have given it to the Levite, to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, just as you commanded me. I've neither transgressed nor neglected any of your commandments. I have not eaten any of it in the morning. I've not cleared out any of it while I was unclean, and I have not deposited any of it with the dead. I have obeyed the Lord my God. I have done just as you commanded me. Look down from your holy abode from heaven and bless your people, Israel, and the soil you have given us, a land flowing with milk and honey, as you swore to our fathers. This is the one place where we actually see a little bit of continue to give us fertility, continue to give us in the soil and the land abundance. But it really still is also now based on making sure that you're taking care of those who don't have anything. So it is, again, bringing forth some of your food for remembering your Exodus, bringing forth some of your food for the Levites and for those who don't have anything, what we call tithing. By the way, pointing out, you don't leave it for the dead. I've not given it. Now, you can understand why it says that, because people would have been motivated to leave offerings to the dead. Because they're praying to the dead. They're saying, oh, God will remember us, but let's also have our ancestors remember us. Let's give an offering to the dead. It actually says in the Torah, don't do that. And you better make sure that when you're offering it to God, that you're not offering, or into the poor, that you're not offering it to the dead. Now, it's probably because people did it anyways, or they did it not from their truma, they just did it from their other stuff, if you will. If somebody said, hey, why are you leaving stuff for the dead? And they said, well, it's not that stuff. I didn't leave any of the truma. I left some other stuff. I left not my tithe. I left some of my other stuff. Well, look, Judaism doesn't encourage it anyways, but every other culture in the world did. Every other culture, they were offering sacrifices and offerings to the dead. They were putting offerings out to the dead. They still do it in some countries. So the idea that Judaism said, we don't do that, was weird then. And to some extent, still weird now. It's why people poured out alcohol on the ground, for those who passed. We don't, we just didn't do that. And, well, people did because they did it because everyone else was doing it and they felt like they needed to do it. But they're not supposed to do it. They're not encouraged to do it. Definitely shouldn't do it with any of your stuff that was supposed to go to the priests or to the poor. Any of your holy stuff, definitely don't want to hear you doing it for that. So it was not encouraged. It was not encouraged, and people still did it, but that's because the compulsion to do it was there. Judaism fought against that. It fought against that impulse. It's a lot less common in the West. It's a lot less common in America and most of Europe. It's not so common for people to put offerings to the dead. But in India, in Asia, in parts of East Asia, very common. In South America, it was very common. Native American cultures, very common. So, continues. The Lord your God commands you this day to observe these laws and rules. Observe them faithfully with all your heart and soul. You have affirmed this day that the Lord is your God, that you will walk in his ways, that you will observe his laws and commandments and rules, and that you will obey him. And that the Lord has affirmed this day that you are, as he promised you, his treasured people, and you shall observe his commandments, and that he will set you in fame and renown and glory high above all the nations that he has made, and that you shall be, as he promised, a holy people to the Lord your God. So all of these things kind of finish with this wonderful little finishing text, which is you're Am Segula, you're a holy. This is the phrase we've had a lot in Deuteronomy, Am Segula, treasure nation, a treasure to God. So you're not the chosen people because you're the most numerous, or because you're the strongest, or because there's something inherently good about you. No, it's because you observe the mitzvot. Lishmor kol mitzvotav. You observe God's commandments, all God's commandments. So that is part of being treasured, is this responsibility. Now, we move into chapter 27 in Tavo. What we read here is we're going to move in the next couple of chapters into something that Tavo is probably most known for. I think it should be most known for the Passover declaration, if you will. But a lot of people talk about this section here, which is different from what we've read about in Deuteronomy up until now, which are laws. Now, technically, that last thing we read about, it's a little different because it's definitely a Thanksgiving offering, but it's still law. This is what you're supposed to do. Now we're going to kind of go back for the rest of Deuteronomy. We're moving away from laws and traditions into kind of summary approaches to behavior and to the covenant, and kind of stepping back into the macro picture. So rather than having lots of laws, kind of a micro, more into the details, now we kind of step back like we did at the beginning of Deuteronomy into the wider purpose of these laws, which again, you kind of hear it even here, because you observe all the commandments. This is kind of getting back to what we see at the beginning of Deuteronomy before we get into those laws. So again, if Deuteronomy was a freestanding work, it begins with kind of an opening prologue, which sets up why the covenant is important, because we were at Mount Sinai and because these are the laws that God gave us. And then it goes into the enumeration of those laws, including, as we said, the 10 Commandments is repeated in Deuteronomy. We also have all those laws from Re'eh, all those laws from Kitetse, all those laws, Shoftim, all those laws. So now we continue with this big part of Tavo, and I would say the last 6 chapters of Deuteronomy, which we start now, which is kind of the closing. So we have a prologue, the laws, and then, if you will, kind of the epilogue or the okay, now you have the laws. So Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, observe all the instruction I enjoin upon you this day, which again is Shamor et kol hamitzvah asher, and again, Hayom, this day, which goes again to this idea that it seems like this is a moment in time. As soon as you have crossed the Jordan and into the land that the Lord your God has given you, you shall set up large stones, coat them with plaster, and inscribe upon them all the words of this teaching, which is Divrei HaTorah Hazot, this teaching with a capital T for teaching or Torah. When you cross over to enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord your God of your fathers promised you, upon crossing the Jordan, you shall set up these stones about which I charge you this day on Mount Ebal and coat them with plaster. So again, it says you're supposed to inscribe the laws of this teaching. So again, there seems to be not just a telling of the law, but there actually is going to be a place where you can read these laws. Literally, when you cross over into Jordan, there's going to be a place of covenanting that you'll actually see the law on stones. You actually can walk up to them and see that. And we forget that. This wasn't just something that people could hear or that was read to them once a year. No, they actually could go up any day of the week and go up and see these laws. Now, again, is it maybe from, Deuteronomy? Is it the whole Torah? I don't know. Most likely it's Deuteronomy, but what's the purpose of them? So they're here at Mount Ebal. And there too you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. Do not wield iron tool over them. You must build the altar of the Lord your God of hewn stones. You shall offer on it burnt offerings to the Lord your God. You shall sacrifice there offerings of well-being and eat them, and rejoicing before the Lord your God. And on those stones you shall inscribe every word of this teaching most distinctly. Okay, so it also says you make an altar there, which is interesting because it's not like the altar in Jerusalem or in the place that you're going to have, right? But it is definitely an important place. And it is a place where people could come and see the laws. It says, Moses and the Levitical priests spoke to all Israel, saying, silence, check it. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, Hayom, this day, today, you have become the people of the Lord your God. Heed the Lord your God and observe all his commandments and his laws, which I enjoin upon you this day. So it's very similar to, again, the prologue is now in the epilogue. Thereupon Moses charged the people, saying, after you've crossed the Jordan, the following shall stand on Mount Gerizim. When the blessing of the people of Israel has spoken, Shimon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And for the curse, the following shall stand on Mount Ebal: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. The Levites shall then proclaim in a loud voice to all the people of Israel. And so there is a tradition that when they came into the land, you stand on these two mountains, Mount Gerizim on one side and Mount Ebal, these two mountains that are near each other. And in front of all the people, half the tribes are on one side and half the tribes on the other. And what you're going to hear are the blessings and curses. And here they are. And this is what Deuteronomy, this is what Tavo kind of now, after hearing the law, now you have now you have what the consequences are for not following the law. And here's what it says. Cursed be anyone who makes a sculptured or molten image, abhorred by the Lord, a craftsman's handiwork, and sets it up in secret, and all the people shall respond, Amen. So very similar to the first commandment and the 10 commandments is this law, or the first two commandments, about not having other gods and creating idols to them. The next law is very similar to the fourth commandment in the Torah. Not, again, cursed be anyone who insults his father and mother, and all the people shall say Amen. So it's not you shall honor your father and mother. It's cursed be the people who insults their father and mother. So this is kind of put into the negative form, and not I mean just the negative form, which is, honor your father and mother, but if you do something bad, if you insult them, then you're cursed. And the Hebrew word here is aror. This is the curses for people who are literally breaking the law. Cursed be he who moves his fellow countryman's landmark, and all the people shall say Amen. So this wasn't in the 10 commandments, but it's one that is very important, which has to do with, again, boundary rights, legal rights of your property. And it's basically saying, again, right off the bat, these are ethical laws. It's a mixture. Now, these are different than a list of laws, right? Because assumedly, and we've heard these laws before, but what these are is kind of like the public affirmation of the law, and the fact that from now on, people are going to follow these laws. And these are the laws that they're going to follow. These are the laws that they're responsible for. And guess what? These are the laws that there are consequences for if you break them. Now, it's not that all the other laws you didn't have to follow, of course. I mean, that's not what they're saying. They're not saying, hey, you remember these laws? Well, the other ones you don't have to remember. That's not, of course, that's not the assumption here. That's not where they're going from. But what they are saying is, look, these laws are fundamental, practical laws for living in the land, and our society depends on it. And so here we're going to have, again, this whole list of curses and blessings. And again, you'll see what happens with them. Cursed be he who misdirects a blind person on his way. Again, something we read in Leviticus. And all the people shall say Amen. Cursed be he who subverts the rights of the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And all the people shall say Amen. Which again is kind of what we read all the time, protecting those people. Cursed be he who lies with his father's wife, for he has removed his father's garment. We've read this before. It says Amen. So it's not even just his mother, it's his stepmother. Cursed be he who lies with any beast, and all the people shall say Amen. Cursed be he who lies with his sister, whether daughter of his father or his mother, and all the people shall say Amen. So whether it's a half sister, brother, doesn't matter. Cursed be he who lies with his mother-in-law, and all the people shall say Amen. Now, a lot of people are saying, when did that happen? But It happens. It happens. It happened, and it still happens today. So again, not exactly a law that we had, but definitely consistent with the other laws that are with that, which is the laws of family purity. Cursed be he who strikes down his fellow countryman in secret, and all the people shall say, "Oh, amen." Well, we didn't say before about secret, but again, definitely consistent with the Ten Commandments. Cursed be he who accepts a bribe in the case of murder of an innocent person. All the people shall say, amen. Cursed be he who will not uphold the terms of this teaching and observe them. And all the people will say, amen. So here we have this list of curses. It's not exactly one, it's not all ethical laws. It's not all stuff that's in the Torah. It's not all stuff that, it's not all stuff that we're hitting from one vantage point, that we're repeating, or that we're focusing on things that were in one part of the Bible. No, it's in Exodus, it's in Leviticus. There's lots of laws here. And again, the author of Deuteronomy know exactly what were in those books and kind of, in a way, summarize them or hit some of the major points of ethical behavior, family behavior, civil behavior, and then kind of create this list of curses. Now, and again, very similar to the language we have in early part of Deuteronomy. Now, if you obey the Lord your God to observe faithfully all his commandments, which I have pointed upon you this day, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth, and all the blessings shall come upon you and take effect if you will but heed the word of the Lord your God. And here we have the blessings. So just as we started again with the curses on one side of the mountain, on the other, or on one mountain, on the other mountain, we have these blessings. And these are the blessings. Now, again, they're not exactly, I wouldn't say they're opposite of what we read before. You'll see a mixture of ethical, kind of general behavior, if you will. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the issue of your womb, the produce of your soil, and the offspring of your cattle, the calving of your herd, and the lambing of your flock. Now, a lot of people point out to the fertility issue here and say, is this really true? Could we really guarantee that people would have fertility if they followed the laws? Now, because it's not just their animals, it's your family too. So it is talking about people having a successful and fertile family as a blessing. And again, included in this list is our people, but if you see the full context of this, it says, blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be in your comings, and blessed shall be in your goings. Baruch atah bevoecha, baruch atah b'tzeitecha, which is a blessing that we say both, it's on houses, it's the blessing we have by somebody's door, and it's a blessing that we can say to people when they come or when they leave. When you look at what people, well, when we get to the end of this, you'll kind of see the purpose of these blessings. So these are all Baruch. You can see Baruch, 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 Baruch. So we have those. And then it says, the Lord will put to rout before you the enemies who attack you. They will march out against you by a single road, but flee from you by many roads. The Lord will ordain blessings from you upon your barns and upon all your undertakings. He will bless you in the land that the Lord your God has given you. The Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he swore to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. V'halachta b'dircha, and you walk in God's ways. And all the peoples of the earth shall see the Lord's name is proclaimed over you, and they shall stand in fear of you. The Lord will give you abounding prosperity in the issue of your womb, the offspring of your cattle, and the produce of your soil, in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign you. The Lord will open for you his bounteous store, the heavens to provide rain for you and land for your land in the season, and to bless all your undertakings. You will be creditor to many nations, but debtor to none. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. You will always be at the top and never at the bottom, if you obey faithfully and observe the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin upon you this day. Do not deviate to the right or to the left from any of the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, and turn to the worship of other gods. So all of these blessings that come to the people, and again, it's saying if you faithfully observe the commandments, if you follow the law, that all of these things that you're going to get, the bounty of produce, the fact that, again, we have repeated here that the issue of your womb will be, it literally says you'll have children, that you'll have cattle, that you'll have the produce of your soil. That repetition or that context of that is really saying that this isn't so much about, it's not, when you look at the full context, it's not about how many children you have. It's not about the fact that, here it's definitely a part of the abundance and the success that you have. So, people, sometimes say, well, this seems to be promising that if I follow the laws, I'll have kids. Look, within the context of what is being laid out here in Deuteronomy, and a lot of people point to this chapter, to Tavo, is really almost the best example of Deuteronomistic theology. And it's actually called a theology of Deuteronomy, which is very much this idea that it's not about you and I having individual blessings, but as a people, as a group, as a community, as Jews, that we will have this success in the land. And it's not about an individual. It's not about one person having more kids. It's about, as a group, that we're blessed. And so it's difficult for people to say, well, this seems to be saying if I do good things and if I follow the laws, that I'm going to have good things happen to me. And it's definitely like kind of the basis for people, kind of focusing on this prosperity gospel that you hear about in churches. It's very important to notice that in Deuteronomy, all of the language here is a plural and a you directed to the community as a whole, not to one individual. And so it really is this idea that the collective is who Moses, and again, later on, when Moses won't be there, when they're standing on Mount Ebal and they're standing on Mount Gerizim, that when we hear these blessings and curses, that they're for everybody. They're not directed to one person. It's not like, let me tell you what God told you is going to happen to you. It's that all the nations of the earth are going to see you as a nation and stand in fear of you. They're not going to stand in fear of you, Henry. They're going to stand in fear of everybody in the community. They're going to stand in fear of Israel.
And it is to this day. This day.
Yes. And it's not about, again, attacking one person. Clearly, it's about people that would come against you as a nation. And
right.
Absolutely what it says the blessing for Israel will be is they will be a creditor to many nations, but a debtor to none. And this is what, again, Israel's kind of hope and work is, especially over the last 20, 30 years, is to create a society and a country and an economy that was a productive and a net positive economy, and not one that was running on essentially loans. And for a long time, and again, Israel is still a recipient of a lot of money from the United States. There's no question about that. It's very important for people to understand that money is conditioned on Israel spending that money back on arms only that can be purchased from the United States. Israel can't take that money and buy weapons, let's say, from France or from Russia. That money has to be spent back in the United States on weapons. So it's very important to understand that Israel and Egypt, that both were the recipients of those billions of dollars a year. Most of that money that Israel gets, the vast majority of that money is meant to be spent back here in the United States. So at Lockheed and at all the different defense contractors in America, it's a very interesting law because it established that Israel would be able to be part of America's success as well, so that those military contractors would get a lot of money spent here in the United States. So understand that the relationship is one of a traditional, for the last year, just so you know, that Israel's new budget, which was held up because of the many elections that they had, but before last budget for 2021 was $128 billion, 426 billion shekels, but $128 billion. And is based on, again, using a budget that would be a balanced budget. Israel did spend more money in 2021 on essentially stimulus money for companies and for people that were affected by Corona. So that definitely had a huge impact on Israel's budget. But it used to be that, again, Israel would rely on, United States and Americans buying Israel bonds. Today, people buy Israel bonds more to have a nice return on helping out Israel. It helps out Israel, obviously, to be able to have bonds. It helps Israel's credit rating to have us buy bonds in Israel. It helps Israel's economy to have that, have us support Israel through bonds. But Israel doesn't rely on it for its economy anymore. It really does. It has the ability to be self-sustaining. Israel's defense budget is still a fairly large chunk of its overall budget. So I will tell you right now, Israel's defense budget is about 10% of its overall. It's about 17.8 billion. So it's about 10% of Israel's overall budget is its defense budget, which is pretty high. It's a pretty high percentage. I will tell you that there is a part of that budget that was approved in 2021 that will carry over into this year is a budget that also includes a possible strike on Iran. So just so you know, that has already been factored into Israel's budget and Israel's military budget. So sad that Israel has to do that, but Israel has figured that into its military budget. And again, a huge chunk of that will be spent here in the United States. I don't have the total amount that was spent back, but Israel got, in 2019, Israel got 3.8 billion in military aid from the United States, and I'm not sure what percentage was. All but 0.2% of it was for the military. So the memorandum of understanding that was put in by the Clinton and then George W. Bush administrations, a huge chunk of that budget, again, was spent. I'm trying to find out the actual amount that was spent back in the United States, but I don't have that number. I don't have the amount that was actually spent back in the United States, but the vast majority of it is, because if that budget, if 99.8% of it was spent on military, and Israel is only allowed to spend that money on arms that it buys from America, the only other money that would have been spent there would have been on Israel defense contractors. So I'm not sure what percentage of that money went to Israel defense contractors versus American contractors. But again, I want to tell you, as Joyce pointed out, this has truly become something that Israel takes very seriously, which is not to be in a situation where they're in debt. Of course, there's a political effect to that, which is that, again, you can't maybe do certain things because you're indebted to other nations. But also, again, it's not good for the psychology of the country. It's not good for the mental health of the country to be in a situation where they feel like their economy is in shambles. And for much throughout Israel's history, pretty much until the 80s, their economy went through enormous periods of horrible inflation and contraction. And again, it was really when Israel moved into a free market economy, and when, unfortunately, Israel was dealing with boycotts against it from the Arab world, when the United States finally started enforcing and said through the Jackson-Vanik agreement that any countries that boycotted Israel the United States wouldn't do business with, that allowed for Israel to be able to start working with other countries, and the U.S. Congress has been very successful over the years to kind of help Israel and be and have a better economy through defending Israel and to stop boycotts of Israeli products, which is obviously something that we're talking a lot about now too. So these are all issues. It's not stopped. So we're going to go back. You thought, well, we had curses and we had blessings, and guess what? We got some more curses. So what we actually have here, we started off with curses, and then we had blessings, and the blessings started here in verse 5. Actually, it started in verse 3. Sorry, verse 3 is when we actually says the blessings, and then it says the blessing, blessed you shall be in the city and country. Now watch what happens here. When we get back to curses, the curses flip the way it said at the beginning of the chapter. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the country. Cursed shall be your basket and eating bowl. Cursed will be the issue of your womb and the produce of your soil, the calving of your herd and the lambing of your flock. Cursed shall you be in your comings, and cursed shall you be in your goings. The Lord will let loose against you calamity, panic, and frustration in all the enterprises you take, so that you will soon utterly be wiped out because of your evil doing and forsaking me. The Lord will make pestilence cling to you until he has put an end to you and the land you are entering to possess. The Lord will strike you with consumption, fever, and inflammation, with scorching heat and drought, with blight and mildew. They shall hound you until you perish. The skies above you shall be copper, and the earth under you iron. Which again, it's not what you want to have. You don't want to have the earth and the skies turning against you. The Lord will make the rain of your land dust, and sand shall drop on you from the sky. So it's reversing the water, right? So now you have sand falling on you, and you're in a dust bowl. The Lord will put you to rout before your enemies. You shall march out against them by a single road, but flee from them by many roads. You shall become a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. Your carcasses shall become food for all the birds of the sky and all the beasts of the earth, with none to frighten them off. The Lord will strike you with the Egyptian inflammation, which is Shechin Mitzrayim, the Shechin that we read about at the plagues. You're going to get the plagues with hemorrhoids, oil scars, and itch from which you'll never recover. The Lord will strike you with madness, blindness, and dismay. You shall grope at noon as a blind man gropes in the dark. You shall not prosper in your ventures, but shall be constantly abused and robbed, with none to give you help. If you pay a bride price for a wife, another man shall enjoy her. If you build a house, you shall not live in it. If you plant a vineyard, you shall not harvest it. So again, this is kind of the reversal of the things that we read about in Shoftim, that you're supposed to allow soldiers to go back if they've started their marriage, process, if they've already, been engaged, or if they built a house, or if they've planted a vineyard. That all of those things, again, if things go bad, you lose your ability to have any of those things. So this is all stuff that are part of the curse. Your curse is that you're going to lose your ability to have the things that you enjoy, the things that, the things that you would have normally, been excited to have. None of those things are going to be your things. They're going to be the people, essentially the people who go to war. Those are the people who, against you, they're going to get your stuff. You'll get nothing. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Your ass shall be seized in front of you, and it shall not be returned to you. Your flock shall be delivered to your enemies, with none to help you. Your sons and daughters shall be delivered to another people while you look on, and your eyes shall strain from them constantly, but you shall be helpless. People you do not know shall eat up the produce of your soil. In all your gains, you shall be abused and downtrodden continually until you're driven mad by what your eyes behold. So again, this is we read the blessings. They all sound good. What's interesting is that the curses are much more powerful. When you think about what happened, we know that all of this stuff happens when the Babylonians go to war against us. They'll do all of these things. They'll literally take all of our property. They'll kill us. They'll take our children. They'll do all of these things. So again, some people felt that this part of Deuteronomy might have been written by Jeremiah or some of the people who lived during the Babylonian captivity. But again, it's very possible too that people knew what happens when you go to war against somebody, or someone goes to war against you and you lose. And all of these things can happen. All of these things would happen to people who are victims. And again, if it was written before the Babylonian exile, but after this had happened to the northern kingdoms, it happened to the north. It happened to the 10 tribes in the north of Israel, the kingdom of Israel. When the Assyrians defeated them 150 years before the Babylonians defeated the south, there were survivors who came down from the northern part of Israel who said, this is what happens. This is what happens when your country gets conquered. And so people didn't know about it. But again, this is very elaborate, very, very connected to what we read in the book of Lamentations, which is why some people say the language is almost exactly the same in Lamentations, which according to tradition, according to what Lamentation says, is written by Jeremiah, that this is too similar to not be by the same hand. Or at least this part of Deuteronomy is written by that hand. Is it possible? Of course it's possible, but it's also possible, again, that people knew that these are the kind of things that happen when you go to war and you lose. The Lord will afflict you at the knees and thighs with a severe inflammation from which you shall never recover, from the sole of your foot to the crown of your head. The Lord will drive you and the king you have set over you to a nation unknown to you or your fathers, where you shall serve other gods of wood and stone. So again, you're going to go serve those other gods, and you're going to do it in another place. You're going to be exiled. It says so. And this, of course, is exactly what happened during the Babylonian exile. The kings of Judah were taken away. You shall be a consternation, a proverb, and a byword among all the peoples to which the Lord will drive you. Though you take much seed out to the field, you shall gather in little, for the locust shall consume it. Though you plant vineyards and till them, you shall have no wine to drink or store, for the worm shall devour them. Though you have olive trees throughout your territory, you shall have no oil for anointment, for your olives shall drop off. Though you beget sons and daughters, they shall not remain with you, for they will go into captivity. Cricket shall take over the trees and the produce of your land. The stranger in your midst shall rise above you higher and higher, while you sink lower and lower. He shall be your creditor, and you shall not be his. He shall be the head, and you the tail. And all these curses shall befall you, and they shall pursue you and overtake you until you are wiped out, because you did not heed the Lord your God and keep the commandments and the laws he enjoined upon you. So, pretty tough. And that dog says so too. He doesn't like any of that sound. So what happens here? They serve as proofs, signs and proof against you and your offspring for all time, because you would not serve the Lord your God in joy and gladness over the abundance of everything. You shall have to serve in hunger and thirst, naked and lacking everything, the enemies whom the Lord will let loose against you. You will put an iron yoke upon your neck until he has wiped you out. The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, which will swoop down like an eagle, a nation whose language you will not understand, a ruthless nation that will show the old no regard and the young no mercy. Now, when the Babylonian destruction happened, it happened from the Babylonians, who were not a next door neighbor of Israel. So they definitely fulfilled this. Same with the Assyrians when they went against the north. They're not a nation that bordered Israel. They were not like the Ammonites or the Moabites or Edomites or even the Egyptians that bordered the land of Israel. They were from another place. Now, I will tell you that no matter what, when this was written, no matter whether this was written during Moses' time or whether it was written at the latest, my friends, during the Babylonian exile, there's something very strange about what we just read, which is that, as you know, the Jews did indeed return from the Babylonian captivity, right? 70 years later, they returned and established a new Jewish kingdom under Persian authority and under Persian, the Persians gave them permission. They were a vassal state of Persia. But for hundreds of years, the Persians ruled Israel very peacefully, and the Jews had their independence and most importantly, their temple. Not as grand as the first temple, but yet a beautiful temple. And then they were taken over. The Persians were conquered by Alexander the Great, and Israel came under Greek power, which we know of as the time of the Maccabees, when the Greeks occasionally tried to take too much power and fought over the area, whatever. And Judah Maccabee and everybody led the. By this point, Deuteronomy is hundreds of years old. And as the Maccabees are trying to fight for stability against the Greek Syrians and the Greek Egyptians, they're kind of caught in the middle, these two small empires, but very powerful nations that are hundreds of miles, and Israel's, not hundreds of miles. So the Egyptian Greeks and the Syrian Greeks on both sides of them, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. The Jews of Israel during this period made an alliance with a new empire that was flourishing even further away. You know them as the Romans. The Maccabees made a power allegiance with them and said, hey, make sure that if the Greeks on either side of us go to war against us, you'll protect us. And the Romans made a pact with us and said, yeah, sure, we'll be your protectors. Now, what happens is the Romans eventually decide, you know what, we're not your protectors. We're going to own this and everything else. We take advantage of the collapsing Greek empires, little mini empires, and the Romans took power. And they took control of Israel. And eventually, of course, Israel fights a war against them, a losing war against them. But what's so interesting is Rome is many miles away, even further away than Greece. And when the Jewish people read this section from Deuteronomy, hundreds of years later, something became very strange as they read this. And you know what I'm about to point out to you, because no matter what, hundreds of years later, this was the case. It says a nation will come against you from afar, from the end of the earth, which will swoop down like the eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand. A ruthless nation that will show no regard for the old, or for old, no regard to the young, no mercy. Folks, this was a complete prophecy over what happened with the Romans. Complete, much more than the Persians or the Babylonians or any Eastern, because those were far away. They're hundreds of miles away, but they weren't 1,000 miles away like Rome was. They spoke Semitic languages. They spoke languages that were similar. Maybe they didn't understand Babylonian or Persian, but they're close enough. The Romans spoke a completely different language, and they were very far. And more importantly, folks, What is the symbol of the Roman Empire? An eagle.
Oh.
A nation will swoop down like the eagle. Now, I will tell you, if you're a Jew who's reading this in the land of Israel around 20, 30, before the time of Jesus, 100 years before the time of Jesus, 100 years after it, how do you not read that and get the chills? Because no matter what, that was written hundreds of you can say whatever you want. Deuteronomy was written 1000 BCE. It was written 586 BCE. I don't care, 540 BCE. It's written within 500 years of that, but 500 years away from when these people are reading it. And they read this and the chills that go through them as they're literally saying, they swoop down on us like an eagle, a nation whose language you don't understand. They're speaking Greek and Latin, European languages that are not similar, no similar cognates. It's amazing. And so when they read that, they must have had the chills. I have the chills thinking about it 2,000 years later. That happened 2,000 years ago. And I freaked out by that, because how does someone not read that and go, oh my gosh, God was talking to us? And when the Romans burned Jerusalem and they destroyed the temple that King Herod had rebuilt, because remember, the Jews built the temple under the Persians, and then King Herod upgraded it. He decided, I want to make this Jewish temple even nicer so that the Romans respect us, because he liked the Romans. He loved the Romans, King Herod. He wanted the Romans to look at Jerusalem and say, what a magnificent city. So he didn't just build the temple, his new temple. He also built a gymnasia. He also built an amphitheater in Jerusalem. He built all the Roman things too, which upset the Jews, by the way. He said, this is our holy city. You don't build those in Jerusalem. He didn't care. He'd kill the people if they got out of line. But he also built a temple. And people had to say, well, it's a pretty nice temple. But again, after Herod dies and the Romans decide, you know what? These Jews are getting out of hand. We're going to destroy them. And then they destroyed Jerusalem. How did people then not say, oh my gosh, this is exactly what the Torah says is going to happen? And that ended Jewish autonomy for 2,000 years. That's how devastating it was.
Mm-hmm.
It shall devour the offspring of your cattle, the produce of your soil, until you've been wiped out, leaving you nothing of new grain, wine, or oil, or the calving of your herds and the lambing of your flocks, until it has brought you to ruin. Shall shut you up in all your towns throughout the land, until every mighty towering wall in which your trust has come down. And when you are shut up in all your towns throughout your land that the Lord your God has assigned you, you shall eat your own issue, the flesh of your sons and daughters that the Lord your God has assigned you, because of the desperate straits to which your enemy shall reduce you. He who is most tender and fastidious among you shall be too mean to his brother and the wife of his bosom and the children he has spared to share with any of them the flesh of the children that he eats, because he has nothing else left as a result of the desperate straits to which your enemies shall reduce you in your towns. I mean, this level of cannibalism, I mean, this is literally the most horrific thing that you can imagine. And what's so strange is that we read about it in the book of Lamentations. I'll show you when we're done. That this is exactly what Lamentation says happened during the Babylonian. And this is why I don't want to jump around too much, but I'll show it to you so that you can see what I'm talking about here. It's terrible. And she was most tender and dainty among you, so tender and dainty that she would never venture to set foot on the ground, shall begrudge the husband of her bosom and her son and daughter, the afterbirth that issues from between her legs and the baby she bears. She shall eat them secretly because of utter want, and the desperate straits to which your enemy shall reduce you in your towns. If you fail to observe faithfully all the terms of this teaching that are written in this book, to reverence this honored and awesome name, the Lord your God, the Lord will inflict extraordinary plagues upon you and your offspring, strange and lasting plagues, malignant and chronic diseases. He will bring back upon you the sickness of Egypt that you dreaded, so so they shall cling to you. So all those things you saw in Egypt that we talked about, that your ancestors saw in Egypt, you're going to get them. Moreover, the Lord will bring upon you all the other diseases and plagues that are not mentioned in the book of this teaching until you are wiped out. You shall be a scant few after having been as numerous as the stars in the sky, because you did not heed the command of the Lord your God. And as the Lord once delighted in making you prosperous in many, so will the Lord now delight in causing you to perish and wiping you out. You shall be torn from the land that you are about to enter and possess. The Lord will scatter you among all the peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and you shall there serve other gods, wood and stone, whom neither you know or your ancestors have experienced. Yet even among those nations you will find no peace, nor shall you find a foot find your place to rest. The Lord will give you there an anguished heart and eyes that pine in a despondent spirit. The life you face shall be precarious. You shall be in terror night and day, with no assurance of survival. You can see how long this chapter is. It's going. These curses are going all the way here. In the morning you shall say, if only were evening, and in the evening you shall say, if only were morning, because of what your heart shall dread and your eyes shall see. Now, when the Torah says you're going to go into exile and you're going to worship other gods, you know, this is like, you think, well, we worship other gods. It's not such a big deal. No, you're going to worship other gods, and it's not even going to matter there, because compared to everything else you're going to experience, that should be the least of your problems, honestly, because your life will be so precarious. You'll be in terror in night and in day with no assurance of survival. And unfortunately, that was much of the last 2,000 years of Jewish history. The exile that we experienced, and the time that we were in Poland, or the time that we were in Russia, or the time that we were in Spain, or the time that we were in Germany, all of those places were places where the Jewish people had no assurance of survival. That is what the words in Hebrew say, lo ta'amin b'chayecha, not to be assured of your life. Not to be, the word amin is the word amen. It means to be agreed or to be assured. Your chai, your life is no guarantee. And that is what, unfortunately, the Jewish people dealt with for so long. Again, what's your guarantee? Look, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to survive in Israel. Obviously, Israel knows that they could be wiped out. They could be destroyed. But there is a guarantee from the standpoint of your guarantee is that you are in control of it. Your amin, your assurance is your assurance, not someone else's. Not that someone else says, I'm going to protect you, but that you protect yourself. And that autonomy and that self-protection and that literally self-control that Jews had only for the first time 73 years ago is what they're talking about here. What they're talking about here is being a free people in your land. And anybody who doesn't understand that this idea of Jewish nationhood and Jewish people is important and integral to the Torah, that somehow Judaism as a religion and Judaism as a nation or as a people can be separated, understand that that's a false dichotomy. That is literally people saying, I'm anti-Zionist, but I'm not anti-Semitic. It's impossible, because the Jewish people understand that the only way to guarantee our lives, is to have control of our lives. The only way that we can say that Jewish life can be protected, that there can be an amin, that there can be a guarantee or an assurance, is if we have control over it. That's what we have. Again, it's not, there's not going to be another war, that there isn't going to be a Jew that's ever killed in battle in Israel. That's not what they're talking about. They're literally talking about having that assurance, or to have that knowledge that the guarantee that the person who holds your fate is you and not somebody else that decides on a certain day, we're going to round up the Jews today because we owe them too much money, or they've become too powerful, or I just don't like Jews. They killed Jesus. Whatever the reason was, that was their guarantee, and it was ripped up. There was no guarantee. The guarantee didn't exist. The only way you have a guarantee is if you hold it yourself. And that's what Judaism is. That's why Judaism is no different than any other religion or any other group of people that have essentially a national identity, that have an identity as a people. So it's not, they can never be separate. So it's a the last two verses of this horrible chapter. The Lord will send you back to Egypt in galleys by a route which I told you should not see again. There you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves. No one will want you. No one will buy you. These are the terms of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to conclude with the Israelites in the land of Moab, in addition to the covenant which he made to them at Horeb and Mount Sinai. So this covenanting ceremony happened here at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. So on the mountains, just like we had a covenant there, we have a covenant here at these mountains, at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. This is the covenant, if you will, of their entry. This is the covenant of their becoming a people in their land. So this is different than the law in the sense that that was what happened at Mount Sinai. That's how they became a people. They became a civil society that had a contract, that had a what's the word? That they had an understood they had an understood social contract. But what they have now is a national promise that in order for us to be free, in order for us to be a free people, that we're going to be able to have this covenant at Mount Horeb. Now, I want to show you one thing before we move on. I want to show you this place. I don't know that I've ever shared with you this place, what it looks like. So here's this place today, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. This is an interesting panoramic view. Mount Gerizim is on the left over here, and Mount Ebal is over here on the right. And what it says here, and it says here, the modern Nablus, ancient Shechem between a photograph, you see that, or whatever. So this is Nablus right here. This is Nablus. So this is Gerizim, and this is Ebal. Now, Mount Gerizim was the holy mountain for the Samaritans. The Samaritans still is. The Samaritans still offer, the few hundred Samaritans that live in Israel still, they offer sacrifice there every year at Passover. They still go up on Mount Gerizim. That was their holy land. That was their holy mountain. That was their Jerusalem. For hundreds of years, for 2,000 years, the Samaritans have actually had an altar there. Over here, Mount Ebal, the mountain of curses, there's nothing there. And we don't have the plaster. We haven't found the plaster casts or the plaster laws on either of these mountains. But what's interesting here, folks, is that this area that you're looking at right here, there is not one Jew that lives here. I'm telling you, there are very few places that I can show you and say there isn't a Jew that lives here. There's no Jew that lives here. Everything that you're looking at right now, all these buildings, including some modern buildings down here, are inhabited by Palestinians. Every square inch of that land is not being held by Israel. So you can see that ironically, this place that would, again, is essentially the place of covenanting for us in this promised land. And Moses says, when you come in, we're not going there yet, because we're in Moab, we're on the other side of the Jordan. When we come in, you're going to go to this place, and the people will be some of you will be on that side, and some of you will be on the other side, right? We'll be on both sides. But on the map of Israel today, this area is Palestinian territory A. This is an area that is under no circumstances by any Israeli imagination going to become part of Israel or what we would say Israeli land. It's very interesting. So the people who walk through these streets are Palestinian police with guns that are Palestinian Authority, PLO trained, whatever you want to call them. That's who lives here today, folks. It's not Israel. So this is an example of an area that you and I, we'll never go there. I mean, I'm telling you, I've been all over Israel. I shouldn't say never. If I was there, it was 50 years ago, 36 years ago when I was a 7-year-old. And I'm pretty sure I didn't go there. There's no Jewish site to see. There is the tomb of Joseph, which is there, and Jewish people are allowed to go there once a month to offer prayers, to pray there at tomb of Joseph. It's very treacherous. It's been burned many times, as we've talked about. So Israel's tried to maintain a protection over that, but it's been very hard because everybody around it doesn't want it to be there. So don't know what to tell you. When people talk about refugee camps, or when they talk about Palestinians living in tents, or some kind of you can see this is a city. This is the city of Nablus. It is not a safe city for any Israeli to go into. So if you ever watch the show Fauda, this is when Fauda goes into when they go in and have to infiltrate terror cells. It's usually in like Nablus. That's a very Nablus and the city of Jenin in the West Bank are two of the kind of the hotbeds for terrorism in Israel today. So it's very interesting that this area. If you look at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, you and I aren't going to go. Excuse me, we're not going to see it. So it is what it is. I just want you to know that is a picture that you and I will only see in pictures, probably. I don't assume that either one of us, any of us, will ever see that in person anytime soon, or if ever. I don't know what to say other than, again, I don't know that
we probably wouldn't want to take over that for any reason whatsoever.
I don't know that anybody yes, wants to be anywhere near that. But it is interesting that this place that is mentioned in the Torah, it's a perfect example of, hey, if Israel wanted to have control over it or wanted to take people on, a tourist site of it or whatever else, nope, don't do it. They haven't done it. Israel hasn't done it. And again, you and I, Jews, will only see it in a picture. So this is, let me go back to Deuteronomy, and I will show you I do want to show you before we finish tonight, I will show you the text from Lamentation so you can see it. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "You've seen all that the Lord did for you before your eyes in the land of Egypt." Now, again, this is the next generation, right? So they didn't actually see it with their eyes. This next generation was not the generation that saw it with their very eyes, which is interesting because it says before your very eyes. So it is a strange way of laying that out here. But the wondrous feats that you saw with your own eyes, those prodigious signs and marvels, yet this day the Lord has not given you a mind to understand or eyes to see or to hear. I led you through the wilderness 40 years. The clothes on your back did not wear out, nor did the sandals of your feet. You had no bread to eat and no wine or other intoxicant to drink, that you might know that I, the Lord, am your God. So they eat manna, but they don't have other kinds of food. They don't have wine. When you reach this place, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan came out to engage us in battle. We defeated them. What we read about in Numbers, they're still talking about it. We took their land and gave it to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh as their heritage. Therefore, observe faithfully all the terms of this covenant, that you may succeed in all that you undertake. So again, we have this kind of summary of the covenant. Just as the chapter began with Egypt and remembering Egypt, and in a very good way, when you have your harvest, it ends with, you remember those plagues that happened in the with the Egyptians? Yeah, you don't want to go back, because again, you're going to go back as a slave. And remember all those things that happened for you there, right? I want you to understand that those miracles not only are a lesson so that you don't go back there and become like, a slave in Egypt again, but all of those miracles and all those things that I did for you, providing food for you, helping you win these battles, all of these things are lessons from your past. And that Egypt serves as a reminder, just as these other things do too, of, again, never going back and remembering all the great things that God has done for you since you left Egypt as a people. So let's take a very quick look. I want to show you what I was talking about I wanted to show you from Lamentations so that you can see it and see what I'm talking about when we read the similarities, to Lamentations. I wanted you to be able to see what we're talking about here. So here in chapter 2 of Lamentations, it says, alas, women eat their own fruit, their newborn babes. Alas, the priest and prophet are slain in the sanctuary of the Lord. These are the words from Lamentations. Actually,
so we did indulge in cannibalism at one time.
That's what it says. Now read what this one. Read chapter 4. Look.
Yeah.
With their own hands, tender-hearted women have cooked their children. Such became their fare in the disaster of my poor people. So again, Deuteronomy, when we read about it in Lamentations, it's happened. It's not, it will happen. It's happened. It's the past tense.
Right.
So Jeremiah is telling people what has
will
happened.
Happen. And did happen.
Now Jeremiah is now testifying to the fact that this happened. So Lamentations, is what we read every year at Tisha B'Av. This is the text that we read traditionally. And it reminds us of the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, and then later on, 500 years later, by the Romans.
The Romans.
On the same day, according to tradition. Now, that's crazy, right? It happened on the same day. And it's the same day, by the way, later on, that the Spanish exiled the Jews. Not the beginning of the Inquisition. The Inquisition started 100 years before. What happened on that day, on Tisha B'Av, is that the Spanish finally said in August of 1492, get out. You either converted, you either get killed, or you leave. Those are your three choices. It was on Tisha B'Av. And that was the day, too, that Columbus set sail for the New World on the next day. He waited for a day after Tisha B'Av and then set sail in 1492 to the New World. So this happened on Tisha B'Av. What's very strange about it is, again, that is an amazing coincidence that happened. If it was, like the Spanish didn't do it because they knew it was Tisha B'Av. It's very interesting, though, with the Roman situation, there is a theory, and we'll never know for sure, that the Jews who lived in Israel at the time of the Romans, the ones who were fighting the Romans, saw themselves living through, and why not, as the Babylonian experience, and that they actually intentionally kind of set fire to Jerusalem and to the temple on that day, so that it would actually happen on Tisha B'Av, because of the already the holiday by the time of the Romans had been celebrated or commemorated for over 500 years, so that the Jews actually almost intentionally, or some Jews intentionally do that, because we do know that part of the fires that were set up on Tisha B'Av in Jerusalem were actually set by Jews themselves. So it is possible that it became somewhat of a prophetic, of a self-fulfilling prophecy by the Jews. That's possible, but not that the Spanish decided to exile us on that day. That's pretty wild. So again, Tisha B'Av is a day when we're so sad that we read this book we called Echa, which is the first word of Lamentations in Hebrew. Echa is what we call it. The word means alas, oh no, woe is me. That's what Echa means. So it begins, lonely sits the city once great with people. She that was great among all nations is like a widow. The princess among states is become a thrall. Bitterly she weeps at night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her. Of all friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. Judah has gone into exile because of misery and harsh oppression. So again, Jerusalem is compared to a woman, and this is over and over again. It's her. And gone from fair Zion. Zion is called Bat Zion. She's the fair Zion. She's the daughter Zion. That were her glory. Her leaders were like stags that found no pasture. They could walk feebly before the pursuers. All of this stuff, Jerusalem has now been destroyed. So it's a very sad thing. Of course, we remember Jerusalem and the fact that we never forgot Jerusalem. Even at our weddings, what did we do? We destroyed a glass to remember the destruction of Jerusalem. We did that. We still do that. We break a glass. We break a glass to remember this moment when Jerusalem was destroyed. Jerusalem fell. Now, thankfully, again, Jerusalem is being rebuilt. And I always tell couples when we break that glass, don't forget that we live in a time when Jerusalem is being rebuilt and restored. That's something to celebrate. So we remember Tisha B'Av, but we also remember. And by the way, I know Orthodox Jews. I was in England, by the way, for this last Tisha B'Av a month ago. Some of you know that. I was in England. I talked with some Orthodox people there, and they don't fast anymore on Tisha B'Av. I said, why? So because Israel is being rebuilt. And they say, we don't think we should fast anymore now that Israel's been rebuilt. Interesting idea. Something to think about. But I'm telling you, these were Orthodox Jews that would have fasted. And people were kind of amazed that I fasted in England because the fast didn't end until 10:30 that night. Honestly, 10:30 at night is when I ended the fast. Now, it was probably then more like a 27-hour fast.
Wow.
But it was a long fast, and it does go down as one of my Tisha B'Av remembrances of, again, being in a weird place for Tisha B'Av. But I've been in Israel for Tisha B'Av. I've been in Germany for Tisha B'Av. And now I can remember this one too. So folks, I want to tell you, we will be finishing up the last few weeks. We have one night of Wednesday. We're not going to have class, folks. And you know when that is? When is that? Yom Kippur. September 15th is a Wednesday. Other than that, my friends, we will be finishing up Torah. And over the next few weeks, you'll see the last chapters of Deuteronomy. We really, as you see, we're coming to the end of Deuteronomy. Oh, I'm in Lamentations, but in Deuteronomy, we really only have 5 more chapters. So we're wrapping up. We have like a few more weeks, like 4 more weeks, but we really have only 5 more chapters. So classes will be a little shorter. And then, folks, we're going to come to the end of the year. I want to wish everyone a happy new year, a healthy year. We're working real hard to make sure services will be meaningful. And I want to thank Harvey so much for helping me. Again, everyone who's a member will not have to, tickets are included in your membership. And we're going to include and show everybody how to get their tickets, how to come in person, how to watch online, how to do every variation of that. But we want to see, if you want to come, we want you to be able to be with us for High Holidays. So I know everybody's asking about it and questioning about it. I promise you it's all going to be good. So I hope it's all going to be good, and I hope you're all healthy. So folks, stay good, and Happy New Year. Happy and healthy year, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being with us.
Thanks, Rabbi.
We'll see y'all. Stay good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good class.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. We'll see you.